Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. John pulled the blinds shut and locked the front door, his heart pounding like the storm outside. Whoever they were, the alien woman's words chilled him to the core. He didn't have much time to figure this out. He turned his attention back to her. The wound on her side was deep, but the bleeding had slowed, likely thanks to whatever alien biology kept her alive this long. The iridescent blood shimmered faintly in the light of his desk lamp, an almost hypnotic sight. Shaking himself, he grabbed a bottle of antiseptic from his first aid kit. "I don't know if this is gonna work on you," he muttered, dousing the cloth with the solution. "But it's better than nothing." The alien stirred slightly as he pressed the cloth to her wound, letting out a soft, pained gasp. "Sorry," John said quickly. "It's just to clean it. You're lucky I'm not squeamish." She didn't respond, her breathing uneven but steady. He worked as carefully as he could, noting the strange texture of her skin, smooth like polished stone but warm to the touch. It wasn't until he reached for a roll of gauze that he noticed the faint glow emanating from a small device clipped to her belt. "What's this?" he murmured, carefully unhooking the object. The device fit snugly in his palm, its surface etched with unfamiliar symbols. It pulsed with a rhythmic light, almost like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the glow intensified. "Whoa!" John yelped, nearly dropping it as the device emitted a soft hum. A holographic projection flickered to life above it, displaying alien characters and symbols. They shifted rapidly, forming a map of some kind. At the center, a red dot pulsed, his house. "Oh, great," John groaned. "A tracking beacon. That's just fantastic." He glanced at the unconscious woman, torn between frustration and pity. Whoever she was, she'd brought trouble right to his doorstep. But as he looked at her fragile form, her face contorted in pain even in sleep, he couldn't bring himself to be angry. With a sigh, he set the device down and grabbed his old hunting rifle from the closet. He wasn't much of a fighter, but he wasn't about to let anyone, or anything, storm into his home without a fight. The lights outside grew brighter, casting eerie beams through the cracks in the blinds. John peeked through a gap, his stomach sinking at what he saw. 3 sleek, black craft hovered just above the treetops, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal. They moved with a predatory grace, scanning the area with beams of pale blue light. "Crap, crap, crap," John muttered under his breath. A sudden noise behind him made him spin around, rifle raised. The alien woman was awake, her eyes wide with alarm. She sat up with difficulty, clutching her side. "They're here," she rasped, her voice laced with fear. "Yeah, I noticed," John said, his voice tense. "Care to explain why they're after you?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering between him and the window. "No time. Need to hide." "Hide? Lady, they've got a tracker on you." Her eyes widened. "Tracker? Where?" John pointed to the glowing device on the table. Her expression darkened as she grabbed it, muttering something in her language. With a sharp twist, she deactivated it, the hologram vanishing instantly. "That should slow them down," she said, her voice steadier now. "Slow them down?" John echoed. "They're practically on top of us." As if on cue, a sharp, metallic clang echoed through the house. Something, or someone, had landed on the roof. John's grip on the rifle tightened. "You'd better have a plan, or this is gonna be a really short partnership." The alien woman stood shakily, her movements graceful despite her injury. "If they breach, aim for their masks. Their breathers are fragile." "Great. Anything else?" "Run fast." John rolled his eyes. "Terrific." The next few moments were a blur. A deafening crash sounded as the front door caved in, revealing a towering figure clad in dark, segmented armor. Its face was hidden behind a sleek helmet, its glowing visor scanning the room. Without thinking, John fired. The shot rang out, striking the intruder's mask. The visor cracked, and the figure staggered, emitting a garbled, inhuman screech. That worked, John muttered, reloading. Two more figures burst in through the shattered door, their weapons glowing ominously. John ducked behind the couch, pulling the alien woman with him. "Stay down," he barked, firing another shot. The woman grabbed a piece of debris, a jagged shard of metal, and hurled it with surprising strength. It struck one of the intruders, piercing its armor. "Not bad," John said, impressed. "Watch out," she shouted, shoving him aside as a beam of energy sizzled past, scorching the wall. The fight was chaotic, a desperate scramble for survival. John's heart raced as he fired shot after shot, his hands trembling with adrenaline. The alien woman fought alongside him, her movements fluid and precise despite her wound. Finally, the last of the intruders fell, its helmet shattered and its body slumping to the ground. John leaned against the wall, panting. "Please tell me that's all of them." The woman didn't answer. She was staring at the glowing device on the table, which had reactivated on its own. The red dot was flashing rapidly now. "What's that mean?" John asked, dreading the answer. She looked at him, her expression grim. "Reinforcements." John groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Of course it does." The alien woman stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You helped me. I'll protect you." "Protect me?" he said, incredulous. "Lady, I'm just a guy with a gun and a workshop. I don't even know your name." She hesitated, then said, "Zira." "My name is Zira." "John," he replied, sighing. "Guess we're in this together now, Zira." Outside, the hum of approaching craft grew louder. The storm raged on, lightning illuminating the ominous shapes descending from the sky. Together, Zira agreed, gripping the shard of metal like a blade. And as the first of the reinforcements landed, John couldn't help but think he'd just signed up for the wildest night of his life. The night was far from over. The metallic hum of alien craft vibrated in the air, blending with the storm's howling winds. John and Zira stood amidst the wreckage of his living room, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. "How many more of them can we expect?" John asked, his voice edged with tension. Zira's sharp eyes scanned the shattered doorway. "A full strike team. 10, maybe 12. They will not stop until I am dead, or taken." John felt the weight of her words settle heavily in his chest. He had no idea why this strange alien woman had shown up on his doorstep or what made her so valuable, but he wasn't about to hand her over to these things. "All right," he said, hefting his rifle. "We're not sticking around for a dozen more of those guys. Can you walk?" "Yes," Zira said, though the strain in her voice told a different story. "Good. We'll use the woods. They'll have trouble navigating in there with all their fancy tech." Zira raised an eyebrow. "Primitive terrain. Interesting strategy." "Yeah, well, welcome to Earth. Let's move." John led Zira out the back door and into the dense forest behind his house. The rain made the ground slick and treacherous, but it also masked their movements. The towering trees provided cover, their thick branches blotting out the unnatural glow of the alien craft overhead. "Where are we going?" Zira asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. "There's an old bunker about half a mile from here," John said. "Built it myself when I got tired of trusting the government to keep me safe. It's got supplies, tools, and a signal jammer, might buy us some time." Zira stumbled, her strength waning. John caught her arm, steadying her. "Hey, you okay?" "I will manage," she said, but the faint tremor in her voice betrayed her. John didn't press her. They didn't have time for arguments. The bunker came into view just as the faint hum of alien drones echoed through the trees. It was a small, unassuming structure, camouflaged by moss and overgrowth. John keyed in the access code, the reinforced door sliding open with a soft hiss. "Get inside," he urged, ushering Zira through. Once they were both inside, John sealed the door and activated the signal jammer. The hum of the device filled the air, a faint static that offered a shred of hope. "All right," John said, setting his rifle down. "We're safe. For now." Zira collapsed onto a nearby bench, her breathing labored. John grabbed a water bottle from the supply shelf and handed it to her. "Drink. You need it." She took the bottle with a nod of gratitude, sipping cautiously. "Now," John said, sitting across from her. "You need to start talking. Who are these guys, and why are they after you?" Zira hesitated, her gaze distant. "They are Krythar Dominion enforcers. My people call them hunters. They are relentless, ruthless. Their only purpose is to enforce the will of the Dominion. And you? What's your deal?" "I am," she paused, searching for the right words. "I was a scientist. I worked for the Dominion, developing technologies to expand their control. But I could not live with the atrocities they committed. I defected, stealing something they value greatly." "What kind of something?" Zira's eyes met his, her expression serious. "A key. A piece of technology that could render their entire fleet vulnerable. If it falls back into their hands, the consequences will be catastrophic, for my people and yours." John exhaled sharply. "So you're telling me these guys are here to make sure you don't spill their secrets? And now they know you're with me. Fantastic." "I am sorry," Zira said softly. "I did not mean to involve you." "Well, it's a little late for that now, isn't it?" John said, though there was no real anger in his tone. The sound of distant explosions cut through their conversation. John's heart sank as the signal jammer flickered briefly before stabilizing. "They're trying to disable the jammer," Zira said, her voice tight. "Can they do that?" "If they bring enough force, yes." John swore under his breath. "All right, plan B. We can't stay here. You said this key of yours could help take them down, right? How does it work?" Zira hesitated again, then reached into a hidden compartment on her belt. She produced a small, crystalline device that pulsed faintly with an inner light. "This contains encrypted data, codes, weaknesses, and locations of hidden Dominion outposts. It must reach the Alliance. They are the only ones who can act on it." "And where's the Alliance?" "Far from here," Zira admitted. "But if I can boost a signal, they will come." John rubbed his temples. "Boost a signal. Sure. Let me just pull a high-powered alien transmitter out of my back pocket." Zira tilted her head. "You humans are resourceful. Surely you have something." John rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a grin. "Flattery's not gonna get you anywhere. But maybe, just maybe, I've got an idea." John rummaged through the shelves, pulling out old components and cobbling them together with practiced hands. Zira watched, fascinated, as he worked. "You're skilled," she said. "What is your profession?" "Engineer," John said without looking up. "Used to work on satellites and communication systems before I got fed up with corporate nonsense. Now I mostly tinker." "You underestimate your value," Zira said. "Your ingenuity is remarkable." John shrugged, focusing on his work. As he worked, the distant hum grew louder. The Krythar were closing in. "Almost there," John muttered, connecting the final wire. The device sparked to life, emitting a faint, rhythmic pulse. "That should do it," he said. "This thing's crude, but it'll amplify your signal. Let's hope your friends are listening." Zira stepped forward, placing the crystalline key into the device. The pulse intensified, sending a beam of light through the bunker's ceiling and into the stormy sky. "They will hear," she said with quiet confidence. The Krythar, however, were not about to let them succeed. The ground shook as explosions rocked the bunker, debris falling from the ceiling. "They found us," Zira said, her tone grim. "No kidding," John said, grabbing his rifle. As the first breach opened in the bunker's wall, John and Zira stood side by side, ready to face the onslaught. "Here we go again," John muttered. "For freedom," Zira said, her voice resolute. "For survival," John added, raising his weapon. The next wave of Krythar stormed in, their weapons glowing ominously. And so, the fight continued. The storm outside roared like a living creature, its lightning illuminating the dark forest and casting jagged shadows across the bunker walls. The Krythar enforcers poured through the breach with mechanical precision, their segmented armor gleaming in the dim light. John and Zira had no choice but to fight. "Stay close," John shouted, raising his rifle. His first shot rang out, slamming into the visor of the nearest enforcer. The figure staggered but didn't fall, its armor absorbing much of the impact. "They've adapted," Zira warned, hurling her makeshift blade at another intruder. The shard embedded itself in the joint of its armor, sending the Krythar to its knees with a screech. John gritted his teeth. Figures they'd learned from the first wave. As the Krythar pressed forward, their energy weapons lit up the room with deadly precision. John ducked behind an overturned workbench, firing blindly to keep them at bay. Zira moved with surprising agility for someone injured, her fluid movements a stark contrast to the rigid efficiency of their attackers. "They're trying to cut us off from the signal," Zira said, glancing toward the makeshift transmitter. The device pulsed steadily, the beam of light still reaching skyward. "Well, they're not taking it without a fight," John growled. A desperate counterattack. John grabbed a small explosive device from his workshop stash. It wasn't much, a homemade contraption he'd rigged for emergencies, but it would have to do. He lobbed it toward the Krythar, ducking as the explosion tore through the room. Shrapnel ricocheted off their armor, and two of the enforcers crumpled under the force. "That bought us some time," John said, reloading his rifle. Zira knelt beside him, her expression grim. "Not enough. More will come." John glanced at the crystalline key still connected to the transmitter. "How long until your people pick up the signal?" "Minutes," Zira replied. "Perhaps less." "Great," John muttered. "All we have to do is survive for an eternity." The next wave came quickly. This time, the Krythar brought a new weapon, a compact device that emitted a piercing, high-pitched sound. John clutched his head, the noise like needles driving into his brain. Zira cried out in pain, her alien physiology seemingly even more sensitive to the assault. She collapsed to the floor, clutching her ears. John fought through the agony, gritting his teeth as he aimed his rifle. His shot struck the device, shattering it. The noise ceased, but its effects lingered. "Zira," he shouted, shaking her shoulder. "I am fine," she managed, though her face was pale. She pushed herself up with effort, her movements slower than before. "You're not fine," John said, but there was no time for argument. Turning the tide. As the Krythar advanced, John's eyes darted around the room, searching for an edge. His gaze landed on a stack of power cells he'd salvaged months ago. They were unstable and unpredictable but could pack a punch if overloaded. "Cover me," he shouted to Zira, grabbing the nearest power cell. Zira nodded, summoning what strength she had left. She darted toward the Krythar, her blade flashing as she struck at their joints and exposed wiring. Though outnumbered, her precision and agility gave her an advantage, at least for the moment. Meanwhile, John rigged the power cell to overload, the device humming ominously in his hands. He tossed it toward the center of the Krythar formation and ducked behind cover. The explosion was deafening, a burst of energy that sent a shockwave through the bunker. Krythar enforcers were flung like ragdolls, their armor cracking under the force. John peeked over his cover, coughing from the smoke. That did it. Zira staggered back to him, her movements unsteady. You are full of surprises, John. Yeah, well, let's hope I've got one more in me, he said, glancing at the transmitter. Its pulse had intensified, the light growing brighter. It's working, Zira said, hope flickering in her eyes. The arrival. The Krythar weren't done yet. A new figure emerged from the breach, taller and more heavily armored than the others. Its visor burned with an eerie red glow, and it carried a weapon that hummed with destructive energy. That's their commander, Zira said, her voice low. We cannot face him directly. John stared at the towering figure, his fingers tightening around his rifle. We don't have a choice. The commander moved with chilling purpose, raising its weapon. A blast of energy erupted, striking the transmitter. Sparks flew, and the device flickered but held. Stay away from that thing. John shouted, firing a volley of shots. The bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the commander's armor. Zira lunged at the commander, her blade aimed for its exposed joints. The alien leader swatted her aside with brutal force, sending her crashing into the wall. Zira! John shouted, panic rising. He turned back to the commander, his mind racing. He couldn't take it down with brute force. He needed a plan, and fast. A reckless gamble. John grabbed the last power cell from the shelf. He rewired it on the fly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos around him. Come on, he muttered, glancing at the commander as it advanced on the transmitter. Zira stirred, her voice weak but determined. What are you doing? Ending this, John said, his jaw set. He activated the power cell, its hum building to a dangerous pitch. Hey, big guy, he shouted, drawing the commander's attention. The towering figure turned, its weapon glowing ominously. John hurled the overloaded power cell directly at it. The explosion was blinding, a burst of light and energy that shook the bunker to its foundation. The commander was engulfed in the blast, its armor cracking and its weapon disintegrating. When the smoke cleared, the commander lay motionless, its once imposing figure reduced to a heap of smoldering metal. Hope on the horizon. John collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving. The transmitter pulsed one final time before its beam cut out. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the sound of the storm outside. Did it work? He asked, his voice hoarse. Zira pulled herself up, wincing. She placed a hand on the crystalline key, which glowed faintly. Yes, she said, a faint smile gracing her lips. The signal was received. John let out a shaky laugh. About time we got some good news. A new beginning. Minutes later, a distant hum grew louder, but this time it wasn't the Krythar. Zira's eyes brightened as sleek, silvery ships descended from the sky, their markings distinct from the Dominions. The Alliance, she said, relief evident in her voice. John stood, swaying slightly. Guess we're saved, huh? Zira looked at him, her expression serious. This is just the beginning. The Dominion will not stop, but with the Alliance, there is hope. John nodded, a mix of exhaustion and determination in his eyes. Then let's give them hell. As the Alliance troops secured the area and helped them aboard, John couldn't help but feel he'd stumbled into something much bigger than himself. And he wasn't done fighting yet. The Alliance ship hummed with a quiet efficiency as it ascended into the stormy sky. John sat in a cramped seat, his rifle resting at his side. Beside him, Zira looked more at ease, though her injuries still visibly affected her. The interior of the ship was sleek and sterile, its walls glowing faintly with soft blue light. An Alliance officer entered the cabin, their uniform tailored to perfection, their face bearing a calm authority. Their pale skin shimmered faintly, and their eyes glowed faintly gold, a stark reminder that this wasn't Earth's military. I am Captain Van, they said, their voice resonating with a measured cadence. You must be Zira and John, is it? John nodded. That's me. So, what's the plan? Because I'm pretty sure those Krythar jerks aren't done yet. Ven's lips curved into a faint smile. You are correct. The Krythar Dominion does not easily abandon its quarry. But for now, you are under our protection. Great, John said. But protection's not gonna stop them from sending more of those hunters. What's the next step? Zira leaned forward, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. We need to decrypt the key and relay the data to the Alliance fleet. The Dominion's strength lies in its secrecy. If we expose their weaknesses, we can turn the tide. Ven's expression grew serious. Our analysts are already working on it. But decrypting Dominion tech is no simple task. It will take time. John crossed his arms. Time we don't have. If the Krythar track us, they'll hit us harder than before. Ven regarded him for a moment. You're resourceful, Mr. Callahan. We could use someone like you. John blinked. Wait, what? I'm just a guy with a rifle and a bad attitude. You're telling me you don't have enough soldiers or engineers? Zira spoke up. The Alliance is vast, but its resources are stretched thin. Earth is peripheral to their conflict with the Dominion. Peripheral? John said, his frustration mounting. Tell that to my busted house. Which is why your skills are invaluable, Ven said. You've already proven your ingenuity in the field. You could be instrumental in what comes next. John leaned back, rubbing his temples. Yeah, sure. Let's just save the galaxy while we're at it. A hidden threat. As the ship broke through the storm and into the quiet expanse of space, a low alert tone sounded. Ven immediately turned to the console. What's going on? John asked, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. We're being followed, Ven said grimly. Krythar interceptors. They must have traced the signal before we arrived. Zira's face darkened. They will not allow us to escape without a fight. John glanced out the small viewport. 3 sleek, black ships loomed in the distance, their forms ominous against the starry backdrop. Can't we outrun them? He asked. Our ship isn't built for combat, Ven said, fingers dancing across the controls. But we have countermeasures. The Krythar interceptors began to close the gap, their weapons glowing with ominous energy. Ven activated a series of defensive maneuvers, the ship lurching as automated turrets fired bursts of plasma at the pursuing craft. We won't hold them off for long, Ven said. John stood, gripping his rifle. What can I do? Ven glanced at him. The engine core is vulnerable to overload. If they target it, we'll be defenseless. Head to the engine room and ensure it remains stable. On it, John said, already moving. The engine room. The engine room was a maze of conduits and glowing panels, the hum of the ship's core reverberating through the air. John approached the main console, scanning for any signs of damage. A sudden tremor rocked the ship, sending sparks flying from a nearby conduit. John swore under his breath, grabbing a toolkit from the wall. Figures I'd end up fixing things under fire, he muttered. The Krythar's weapons hit the ship again, and an alarm blared as the core's energy output fluctuated dangerously. John worked quickly, patching the damaged conduits and stabilizing the flow. Come on, hold together, he muttered, tightening the final connection. Another impact shook the ship, and John stumbled. The faint sound of footsteps caught his attention, and he spun around, rifle raised. A Krythar hunter stood in the doorway, its weapon trained on him. You've gotta be kidding me, John said. A narrow escape. The hunter advanced, its movements precise and deliberate. John fired, his shot striking its armor but failing to slow it down. Great, he muttered, backing toward the console. His eyes darted to the emergency vent controls. A risky plan formed in his mind. As the hunter raised its weapon, John lunged for the controls, slamming his fist down on the emergency release. The vent's pressure released with a deafening roar, pulling the hunter toward the opening. John braced himself against the console, holding on as the vacuum of space threatened to pull him in as well. The hunter struggled, its claws scraping against the floor, but the force was too strong. With a final screech, it was sucked into the void, and the vent sealed shut. John collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Victory, for now. Back on the bridge, Zira and Ven monitored the battle. The ship's countermeasures managed to disable one of the Krythar interceptors, but the remaining two pressed their attack. "Callahan, we need that engine stable," Ven shouted over the comms. "It's good," John replied, his voice strained. "But I just had to eject a party crasher." "Noted," Ven said, a flicker of approval in their tone. The ship's turrets fired another volley, striking a critical hit on the second interceptor. It exploded in a brilliant burst of light, leaving only one pursuer. Zira stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We can finish this. Divert power to the main thrusters and outmaneuver them." Ven nodded, executing the maneuver. The ship surged forward, twisting through space with a sudden burst of speed. The final Krythar ship fired wildly but failed to land a direct hit. As the Alliance ship disappeared into the safety of a nearby asteroid field, the Krythar were forced to retreat. A moment of calm. In the aftermath of the battle, the tension aboard the ship eased slightly. John returned to the bridge, his face streaked with sweat and grime. "Please tell me we're done running for a bit," he said, collapsing into a seat. "For now," Ven said. "Your efforts were commendable, Mr. Callahan." "Yeah, well, I'd rather not make a habit of it," John replied, though a faint grin tugged at his lips. Zira placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression one of genuine gratitude. "You've done more than I could have hoped for, John." "Thank you." John shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just didn't feel like dying today." Ven interrupted. "We'll reach the Alliance base soon. From there, we'll have the resources to analyze the key and plan our next move." John nodded, though his thoughts were already racing. The battle had been a small victory, but it was clear the war was far from over. And for better or worse, he was in it now. The Alliance base, Nexus 7, was a sprawling station suspended in the black void of space, its luminous rings orbiting a massive central hub. Sleek ships darted in and out of docking bays, their movements precise and fluid. As John's ship approached, a gentle vibration ran through the hull as it docked with a soft clunk. John stared out the viewport, still trying to process the sheer scale of it all. "This is a bit fancier than my workshop," he muttered. Zira, seated beside him, allowed herself a faint smile. "Welcome to the Alliance, John. It's not just a war, we have hope." The ramp lowered with a hiss, and the trio, John, Zira, and Captain Ven, stepped into the bustling station. The air smelled faintly of ozone, and the hum of machinery mixed with the chatter of countless voices speaking in dozens of languages. A place of secrets. Ven led them through the labyrinthine corridors toward the central command chamber. As they walked, Zira leaned toward John. "You should be cautious here," she said softly. "Cautious?" John replied, raising an eyebrow. "These are the good guys, right?" Zira hesitated. "Yes, but alliances are built on compromises. Not everyone here values Earth or its people as you do." John frowned but said nothing. He had learned to trust Zira's instincts, and he'd seen enough duplicity in his own world to know power always came with strings attached. They entered the command chamber, a massive room dominated by a holographic display of the galaxy. A group of officers stood around a central console, their expressions grave. At the head of the table was a tall figure with pale blue skin and a regal bearing. "This is Counselor Ryvek," Ven said, introducing them. Ryvek's gaze fell on John, their eyes sharp and assessing. "You're the human who disrupted a Krythar hunting squad. Impressive, for someone so untrained." John bristled at the backhanded compliment but kept his tone neutral. "I'm just trying to survive. The Krythar didn't give me much choice." Ryvek's lips twitched, the closest approximation of a smile their alien physiology allowed. "A sentiment we all share. Zira, do you have the key?" Zira stepped forward, holding out the crystalline artifact. "It's here, intact and active. But the decryption requires care. If the Dominion encrypted this data, it likely contains traps." Ryvek nodded. "Our specialists will begin immediately. Captain Ven, escort them to the observation deck while we work." Unseen tensions. The observation deck offered a breathtaking view of the galaxy, its stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet. John leaned against the railing, his thoughts swirling. "This is bigger than I ever imagined," he said. "Earth's problems feel tiny compared to all this." Zira joined him, her expression contemplative. "Perspective can be both humbling and empowering. You've already proven that one person can make a difference." John chuckled. "Yeah, but one person doesn't win a war." Zira tilted her head. "No, but they can inspire others to fight." Before John could reply, Ven approached. "We've received preliminary reports from the decryption team. They've uncovered fragments of the Krythar's plans." "Let me guess," John said, "it's bad." Ven nodded grimly. "The Dominion has been targeting systems critical to Alliance operations. Their next target is a relay station in the Andares sector, a linchpin for our communications network." Zira's eyes narrowed. "If they take it out, the Alliance will be blind." "Exactly," Ven said. "And the station's defenses are minimal. They weren't designed to withstand a Dominion assault." John sighed. "So, what's the plan?" "We just got here, and now we're heading back into the fire." Ven's gaze was steady. "You've shown you can handle yourself in combat. If you're willing, we could use you on this mission." John hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He'd never asked to be a soldier, but it was clear the stakes were too high to ignore. "Fine," he said finally. "But I'm gonna need better gear. This rifle isn't cutting it." Ven allowed a small smile. "That can be arranged." Gearing up. The armory was a treasure trove of advanced technology, its walls lined with weapons and armor that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. John walked down the rows, his eyes wide. "Now this is more like it." A quartermaster approached, their cybernetic enhancements gleaming under the bright lights. "You must be the human. Captain Ven said you'd need an upgrade." John nodded. "Yeah. Something that can actually punch through Krythar armor." The quartermaster handed him a sleek, modular rifle. "This is a Zara 7 plasma repeater. Lightweight, adaptable, and devastating against most known armor types." John hefted the weapon, grinning. "I think I'm in love." They also fitted him with a reinforced combat suit, its segmented plates designed to absorb both kinetic and energy impacts. Zira, meanwhile, received upgrades to her own gear, a collapsible energy blade and a wrist-mounted device capable of projecting short-range shields. As they suited up, John glanced at her. "You ready for this?" Zira met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Always." The mission begins. The ship carrying John, Zira, and a small strike team departed Nexus 7 and jumped into hyperspace, the stars stretching into streaks of light. The team was briefed en route, a mix of seasoned Alliance soldiers and specialists. The plan was simple: infiltrate the relay station, bolster its defenses, and hold the line until reinforcements could arrive. As they emerged from hyperspace, the relay station came into view. It was a small, cylindrical structure orbiting a barren moon, its exterior dotted with communication arrays. "Doesn't look like much," John said. Don't underestimate its importance, Ven replied over the comms. Without this station, we lose our ability to coordinate across half the galaxy. The ship docked with the station, and the team disembarked. The station's crew greeted them with a mixture of relief and apprehension. We've detected Krythar ships on the edge of the system, the station's commander said. They'll be here within the hour. John tightened his grip on his rifle. Then we better get to work. Preparing for battle. The team spread out, fortifying the station's defenses. Automated turrets were calibrated, energy barriers reinforced, and choke points established. John worked alongside the others, his hand surprisingly steady despite the looming threat. Zira approached him, her expression thoughtful. You're adapting well. He shrugged. Guess I don't have much of a choice. It's fight or die out here. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You're doing more than just surviving, John. You're making a difference. Before he could respond, the alarms blared. They're here, the commander said, his voice tense. Through the viewport, Krythar ships emerged from hyperspace, their sleek forms glinting ominously. John took a deep breath, raising his rifle. Let's give them hell. The Krythar fleet descended upon the Andari's relay station like a swarm of predators, their ships sleek and deadly. John stood at a defensive turret overlooking the station's exterior, his rifle slung across his back. Beside him, Zira checked the charge on her energy blade, her expression focused. All right, John muttered, scanning the approaching enemy ships. What's the play? Zira gestured toward the incoming fleet. We buy time. The Alliance reinforcements are en route, but they'll take at least 30 minutes to get here. We have to hold the station until then. John adjusted his combat suit, feeling the weight of the reinforced plates. 30 minutes doesn't sound like much, but out here, it feels like a lifetime. The station's commander chimed in over the comms. Brace yourselves. Krythar boarding craft are inbound. We've diverted power to interior shielding, but they'll breach eventually. Zira looked at John. We fight together. Stay close. John nodded, gripping the turret controls. Let's do this. The first wave. The Krythar assault began with precision. Their fighters strafed the station, targeting external defenses and communication arrays. John's turret hummed as he unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts, each shot streaking through the void. Target the engines on those boarding craft. Zira shouted. John swiveled the turret, locking onto an incoming vessel. He fired a concentrated burst, striking the craft's propulsion system. It spun out of control, colliding with one of its allies in a fiery explosion. Not bad, Zira said, her voice tinged with approval. Don't get too comfortable, John replied, as more ships approached. The station's automated defenses joined the fray, but the Krythar fleet adapted quickly. Their advanced shielding absorbed many of the initial strikes, allowing several boarding ships to reach the station's surface. They've breached the outer hull, the commander reported. Multiple teams are moving toward the core. John grimaced. Guess we're not just turret jockeys anymore. Zira activated her energy blade, the weapon glowing with a fierce blue light. Time to engage them head-on. Corridor combat. The station's narrow corridors became a chaotic battleground. Krythar warriors, tall, insectoid creatures with chitinous armor, poured through the breaches, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. John fired his plasma rifle in controlled bursts, each shot aimed at vulnerable joints in their armor. These guys don't go down easy. Zira fought with a fluid grace, her energy blade cutting through the Krythar with lethal precision. Stay behind me, she called out, deflecting a blast that would have struck John. Not my style, John said, ducking behind a console for cover. He tossed a grenade into a cluster of Krythar, the explosion sending them sprawling. The station's crew joined the fight, though their inexperience was evident. John barked orders, directing them to take cover and concentrate their fire. Focus on one target at a time, he shouted. Don't waste your shots. Despite their efforts, the Krythar advanced steadily, their numbers overwhelming. A desperate gamble. Back at the command center, the station's commander updated the team. They're targeting the core. If they disable it, the station's defenses will collapse. John swore under his breath. Great. More good news. Zira's eyes narrowed. We can't let them reach the core. If they succeed, this entire sector will be vulnerable. The commander hesitated. There is one option. A last resort. Spit it out, John said. We can overload the core, creating an energy pulse that will disable all ships within range, including the Krythar fleet. But it would also cripple the station. John frowned. So, we save the sector but lose the station? Zira nodded. It's a sacrifice, but it might be the only way. John considered the stakes, his mind racing. How much time would we have to evacuate? 10 minutes, the commander replied. Maybe less. John looked at Zira. We're really doing this, aren't we? She placed a hand on his shoulder. It's the only way. Holding the line. With the decision made, the team redoubled their efforts. The station's crew worked to prepare the core for overload while John, Zira, and the strike team held the advancing Krythar at bay. The enemy's tactics grew more desperate, their warriors charging with reckless abandon. John fired until his rifle overheated, switching to his sidearm when his primary weapon failed. Zira, how's it looking back there? He shouted, covering her flank. She dispatched another Krythar with a precise strike. The core is almost ready. Hold the line. A sudden explosion rocked the station, and John was thrown against the wall. Dazed, he looked up to see a massive Krythar warrior, its armor gleaming and its weapon humming with energy, striding toward them. Well, that's new, he muttered, struggling to his feet. Zira stepped forward, her energy blade raised. I'll handle this. Like hell you will, John said, gripping his rifle. We do this together. The Krythar warrior roared, charging at them with terrifying speed. The final push. The fight was brutal. The Krythar warrior's strength was unmatched, its strikes shaking the walls with each impact. Zira moved like a dancer, dodging and weaving, her blade finding chinks in its armor. John provided cover, his shots aimed at its weapon. Keep it distracted, he shouted, tossing a plasma grenade. The explosion staggered the warrior, giving Zira an opening. She lunged, driving her blade into its chest. With a final, pained roar, the Krythar fell, its body collapsing in a heap. Zira turned to John, her breathing heavy. It's done. Let's move. Evacuation. The team rushed to the docking bay, the station shaking violently as the core approached critical overload. The remaining crew scrambled aboard the evacuation ships, their faces etched with fear. Is everyone aboard? John called out. The commander nodded. All accounted for. Then let's get the hell out of here. John shouted, slamming the hatch shut. The ship launched just as the station erupted in a blinding wave of energy. The pulse spread outward, disabling the Krythar fleet in an instant. John shielded his eyes, watching as the once pristine station disintegrated into debris. A Pyrrhic victory. As the evacuation ship drifted into the safety of Alliance space, the crew sat in stunned silence. We did it, Zira said softly. John leaned back, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. Yeah. But at what cost? Zira placed a hand on his arm. We bought time. That's all we can do in this war, win one battle at a time. John nodded, though the weight of the sacrifice hung heavy on his shoulders. He wasn't a soldier, but he was starting to understand what it meant to fight for something bigger than himself. As the ship docked with Nexus 7, John knew the war was far from over. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. The Alliance base bustled with activity as John, Zira, and the surviving crew disembarked from the evacuation ship. The air carried an undercurrent of tension. Victory at Andares had been costly, and the station's destruction left a void in the Alliance's strategic capabilities. John stretched his sore muscles, his gaze scanning the crowd. "We're alive. That counts for something, right?" Zira gave a faint nod, though her expression remained clouded. "For now. But we can't celebrate yet. The Krythar will regroup, and their next attack will be even more ruthless." Captain Venn approached, his usual stoic demeanor giving way to grim determination. "Good work out there. You bought us time, but the War Council wants answers, and fast. The decoded data from the artifact suggests deeper complications." John sighed, rubbing his temple. "Why is it never simple? What now?" Venn gestured toward the central command chamber. "Briefing in 10 minutes. Be ready. The Council's ultimatum." The command chamber hummed with subdued urgency as holographic displays projected maps, fleet movements, and intercepted Krythar communications. Counselor Ryvek stood at the head of the table, his expression inscrutable. "Commander Zira, Captain Venn, and Mr. John Daniels," Ryvek began, his tone measured. "You've done well to secure the data and delay the Krythar's advance. But this war will not be won by mere survival." John bristled but kept his mouth shut. Ryvek continued. "The decrypted artifact reveals the Krythar are working with a faction inside the Alliance, traitors undermining our efforts from within." The room erupted in murmurs of disbelief. John leaned toward Zira. "Internal betrayal? Great. Just what we need." Ryvek silenced the room with a wave. "The data points to a specific sector and a series of encrypted transmissions routed through clandestine channels. We suspect a high-ranking officer is involved." Zira's jaw tightened. "If this is true, the Alliance itself is at risk. We need to act immediately." Ryvek nodded. "Precisely. Your team will investigate. But understand this, trust no one. The traitor's identity remains unknown, and revealing your mission could jeopardize everything." John glanced at Zira. "Just another day in paradise, huh? A fractured path." As they prepared for the mission, John found himself alone in the armory, examining his newly repaired rifle. The weight of the past days pressed on him, and for the first time, he questioned his place in this war. Zira entered quietly, her presence a calming counterbalance to his unease. "You're thinking too much." He smirked. "Can't help it. Earth's problems were bad enough. Now I'm neck-deep in galactic politics and traitors." She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You've adapted better than anyone could have expected. But this mission will test us both. Are you ready?" John met her eyes, the flicker of doubt replaced by resolve. "As ready as I'll ever be." Into the maw. Their destination was Valtrek Station, a sprawling outpost known for its bustling trade and covert dealings. The station was a melting pot of species, its corridors alive with merchants, smugglers, and bounty hunters. Disguised as traders, John, Zira, and Venn blended into the crowd. Their goal was to trace the transmission source and uncover the trader's identity. "Keep a low profile," Venn advised. "The Krythar have informants everywhere." John adjusted his hood, scanning the crowd. "Low profile. Got it." They made their way to a shadowed cantina, the dimly lit space filled with the murmur of deals and the clink of glasses. At a corner table, a contact awaited, a wiry alien with mottled green skin and darting eyes. "You're late," the contact hissed. Zira sat opposite him, her tone calm but firm. "We need access to the station's private comm grid. Can you deliver?" The alien's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous request. Expensive, 2. John leaned forward, his voice low. How about we skip the haggling and get to the part where you help us? Or would you prefer we explain your shady dealings to the station authorities? The contact flinched but relented. Fine. I'll give you access. But you didn't get it from me. A web of lies. With the contact's help, they infiltrated the comm hub, a labyrinth of terminals and encrypted data streams. Zero worked quickly, decrypting the transmissions while John and Ven kept watch. This is it, Zero whispered, her fingers flying over the console. The traitor's identity is encoded here. Give me a moment. John's heart pounded as he scanned the room. Something felt off. Zira, how much longer? Almost there, she replied, her focus unwavering. Suddenly, a group of armed figures burst into the room, weapons raised. Hands up, their leader barked. John raised his rifle, his voice steady. You really don't want to do this. The leader sneered. You're under arrest for unauthorized access to Alliance systems. Zira froze, her expression darkening. They know. Ven stepped forward, his voice cold. Stand down. We're on official business. The leader hesitated, then smirked. Official? That's funny, considering you're working against your own people. Betrayal revealed. As chaos erupted, John and Zira fought their way out, their movements synchronized from countless battles. Ven, however, lagged behind, his hesitation betraying a deeper truth. Ven. John shouted. Move. But Ven didn't respond. Instead, he raised his weapon, aiming it at Zira. Don't take another step, he said, his voice trembling. John's blood ran cold. You've got to be kidding me. Zira's eyes narrowed. You're the traitor. Ven's face twisted with guilt and defiance. You don't understand. The Krythar offered a way out, a way to save millions. The Alliance is failing, and I couldn't watch us lose everything. John stepped forward, his rifle steady. You sold out your own people for what? Promises from the Krythar. They have resources we can't match. Ven shouted. You think this war can be won with heroics? You're fools. Zira moved faster than John could react, disarming Ven in a single, fluid motion. You've condemned countless lives, she said, her voice cold. But your betrayal ends here. The cost of truth. With Ven subdued, Zira completed the decryption. The transmissions confirmed everything. The Krythar had infiltrated the Alliance at multiple levels, and Ven was just one of many collaborators. We need to get this to Ryvek, Zira said, securing the data. John glanced at Ven, his expression hard. And what about him? Zira's gaze didn't waver. He'll face justice. The Alliance may be flawed, but we don't execute our own. As they made their way back to their ship, John couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The war was no longer just a fight against an external enemy, it was a battle for the soul of the Alliance itself. The ship docked at Nexus 7 under heavy security. Armed guards awaited John, Zira, and their prisoner, Captain Ven, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and resolve. The atmosphere was tense, word of Ven's betrayal had spread, and trust among the Alliance's ranks was fragile. John stepped off the ramp, his hands clenched into fists. He'd faced Krythar warriors, alien monstrosities, and the vast unknown of space, but the sight of one of their own betraying them left a deeper scar. Counselor Ryvek is waiting, one of the guards said, gesturing toward the command chamber. Zira gave John a brief nod. Stay sharp. This isn't over. He exhaled slowly, following her through the station's labyrinthine halls. Exposing the web. The command chamber was filled with high-ranking officials and representatives from various Alliance factions. Holographic displays flickered with fleet movements and intercepted communications, the room buzzing with heated discussions. Ryvek stood at the head of the table, his expression grim. Commander Zira, Mr. Daniels. I trust your mission was fruitful. Zira stepped forward, placing the data module on the table. We have the proof. The Krythar have infiltrated our ranks at the highest levels. Captain Ven was working with them, but he's only one piece of a larger conspiracy. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room as the data was decrypted and displayed. Names, transmission logs, and coordinated actions illuminated the depth of the betrayal. Ryvek's gaze turned to Ven, who stood in silence, flanked by guards. Do you deny these accusations? Ven's shoulders sagged. No. But I acted to save lives, not to destroy them. The Krythar's resources are limitless, and we're losing this war. You're all too blind to see it. John stepped forward, his voice sharp. Blind? You handed them the keys to the house while claiming it was for our benefit. How many lives were lost because of your help? Ryvek raised a hand to silence the room. Enough. Ven will face trial for his actions, but we must focus on the larger threat. The Krythar's plans are in motion, and they won't wait for us to sort out our internal divisions. The Krythar's gambit. As the council deliberated, Zira pulled John aside. The data points to a coordinated assault on Nexus 7. The Krythar know this is the Alliance's heart. If they take it, the war is over. John frowned. How long do we have? Hours, maybe less, Zira replied. We need to act now. They returned to the table, interrupting the council's heated debate. Councillor Ryvek, Zira said, her voice firm. The Krythar are targeting this station. If we don't prepare, we'll be overrun. Ryvek's eyes narrowed. Are you certain? Zira gestured to the data. It's all here. They've coordinated fleets to converge on Nexus 7. This isn't speculation, it's fact. Ryvek's jaw tightened. Then we have no choice. All forces will be mobilized to defend the station. The final battle begins. The Krythar arrived with terrifying precision. Their fleet darkened the void outside Nexus 7, an armada of sleek warships bristling with weaponry. The station's alarms blared as Alliance ships scrambled to intercept. John stood in the hangar bay, helping coordinate ground defenses. Zira approached, her combat armor gleaming under the harsh lights. This is it, she said. If we lose Nexus 7, the Alliance falls. John nodded, gripping his rifle. No pressure or anything. A fight for survival. The battle erupted with unmatched ferocity. Alliance ships clashed with the Krythar fleet, exchanging volleys of energy blasts and missiles. Inside the station, the fight was just as desperate. Krythar boarding parties breached the outer defenses, flooding the corridors with their insectoid warriors. John and Zira led a team of defenders, their movements precise and deadly. Hold the line. Zira shouted, her energy blade carving through a Krythar soldier. John fired his rifle in controlled bursts, each shot taking down an enemy. They just keep coming. A sudden explosion rocked the station, throwing John against a wall. Dazed, he looked up to see a massive Krythar breacher drilling into the central core. Zira, he called out, pointing to the machine. She nodded, her blade glowing brighter. I'll take it down. Cover me. The turning point. As Zira charged toward the breacher, John and the others fought to keep the Krythar at bay. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. Zira leaped onto the machine, her blade striking its vulnerable joints. Sparks flew as the breacher shuddered, its systems failing under her relentless assault. Almost there, she shouted. John spotted a Krythar sniper aiming at Zira. Without thinking, he sprinted toward her, firing a single, precise shot that took down the sniper. Got your back, he said, grinning. Zira smirked. Appreciated. With a final strike, the breacher collapsed, its drilling arm falling limp. Victory, at a cost. The Krythar retreated as reinforcements arrived, their fleet scattering into the void. The station, though battered, still stood, a testament to the Alliance's resilience. In the aftermath, the survivors gathered in the command chamber. Ryvek addressed them, his voice solemn. Today, we proved that unity can withstand even the greatest threats. But the cost was high, and the war is far from over. John leaned against a console, exhaustion evident on his face. Well, that was fun. Zira chuckled softly. You've earned some rest. But don't get too comfortable. There's always another fight. John looked at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. With you around, I think I can handle it. A new beginning. As the stars glittered beyond the station's viewport, John felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. He wasn't just a bystander anymore, he was part of something greater. And as long as the Krythar threatened the galaxy, he knew he'd be there to fight. Would you like to refine this final part or explore a possible sequel? Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon, so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.